Did you know Clint Eastwood's mother was cut from the film after a full day of uncomfortable shooting, or that Gene Hackman's own daughters tried to stop him from taking the role? From unscripted snowstorms to a script that sat in a drawer for an entire decade, this Western masterpiece hides some truly bizarre production secrets. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Unforgiven. Fact 1. The script aged like fine wine. The story behind Unforgiven's script is one of Hollywood's most unusual tales of patience and perfect timing. David Webb Peoples, who had previously worked as a film editor and co-written Blade Runner, penned the screenplay all the way back in 1976 under the original title, The William Money Killings. What makes this timeline so remarkable is that the script would sit around for 16 years before finally becoming the Oscar-winning masterpiece we know today. Peoples originally sent his script to Clint Eastwood in the early 1980s, but Eastwood admits he didn't even bother reading it at first. When he finally did pick it up around 1980, something interesting happened. Instead of immediately greenlighting the project like most studio executives might do with a quality script, Eastwood made a conscious decision to put it in a drawer and wait. The reason for this unusual delay wasn't laziness or indecision, but rather Eastwood's remarkable self-awareness as both an actor and filmmaker. He felt he was simply too young to play the role of William Money, the aging, world-weary gunslinger haunted by his violent past. Eastwood wanted to wait until he had lived enough life and accumulated enough experience to authentically portray a man grappling with mortality, regret, and the consequences of a lifetime of violence. This decade-long waiting period proved to be genius. By 1991, when filming finally began, Eastwood was 61 years old and had the gravitas and emotional depth that the role demanded. The script that had been gathering dust in his drawer for 10 years suddenly became the perfect vehicle for exploring themes of aging, redemption, and the mythology of the American West. When Eastwood finally approached Peoples about making the film, he initially planned to make changes to the script. However, the more he worked on revisions, the more he realized he was actually making it worse. Eastwood ended up using Peoples' original screenplay almost exactly as written, changing only the title from The William Money Killings to the simpler Unforgiven. Fact 2. Eastwood's mother got the axe. In one of the most heartwarming yet ultimately heartbreaking behind-the-scenes stories from Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood's own mother became an unwitting casualty of the editing room despite giving her all for the production. Ruth Wood, who was in her 80s at the time of filming, was cast as an extra in a scene where passengers board a train, and she approached the role with the same professionalism you'd expect from any seasoned actor. The filming day turned out to be particularly grueling for the elderly Mrs. Wood, who had to spend long hours on set wearing the heavy, uncomfortable period costume that was required for her 19th-century train passenger character. These elaborate dresses, complete with multiple layers and restrictive corsets typical of 1880s fashion, were already challenging for the younger actresses in the cast, but for an 80-year-old woman, the physical demands must have been considerable. Ruth Wood powered through the entire day of shooting without complaint, enduring the weight of the costume, the multiple takes that film production requires, and all the waiting around that comes with being an extra in a major motion picture. She gave her performance everything she had, probably excited about the opportunity to appear in her famous son's latest directorial effort and share in this special moment of his career. However, when Eastwood reached the editing phase of post-production, he faced the difficult reality that many filmmakers encounter when crafting their final cut. The train scene featuring his mother, while probably charming and well-performed, simply didn't serve the overall narrative structure that the film needed. In the ruthless world of film editing, where every minute counts and pacing is crucial, Eastwood made the professional decision to cut the entire sequence from the movie. Eastwood later apologized to his mother, explaining that the film was running too long and that something had to be removed from the final version. However, he made sure to honor her contribution in a much more public way. When Unforgiven swept the Academy Awards ceremony, winning 4 Oscars including Best Picture and Best Director, Eastwood prominently thanked his mother during his acceptance speech, ensuring that her sacrifice for the film was recognized on Hollywood's biggest stage. Fact 3. Gene Hackman's daughters hated his violence. Gene Hackman's initial rejection of what would become his Oscar-winning role in Unforgiven reveals a fascinating family dynamic that nearly cost cinema one of its greatest villainous performances. The acclaimed actor, who had built a reputation for intense dramatic roles throughout the 1970s and 80s, found himself at a crossroads between his professional choices and his family's concerns, when Clint Eastwood approached him about playing the brutal sheriff Little Bill Daggett. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, Hackman had been appearing in a string of action films that featured significant amounts of violence, including movies like The Package, Loose Cannons, Company Business, and Narrow Margin. While these films were commercially successful and showcased Hackman's versatility as an actor, they had begun to trouble his two adult daughters, who were 30 and 26 years old respectively when Unforgiven was offered to him. According to screenwriter David Webb Peoples, Hackman's daughters had grown increasingly uncomfortable with their father's participation in violent entertainment, expressing their concerns directly to him about the impact and message of these films. This wasn't a case of young children being frightened by their father's movie roles, but rather grown women who had developed their own moral perspectives on violence in cinema and were troubled by seeing their father consistently portray characters involved in brutal scenarios. Hackman, who had always prioritized his family relationships, took his daughter's concerns seriously enough to initially turn down the Unforgiven role despite the quality of the script and the prestige of working with Eastwood. As Peoples explained in interviews, Hackman had reached a stage in his career where his family's happiness and approval meant more to him than taking on another high-profile project, even one as potentially significant as this Western. The situation remained at this impasse until Eastwood himself decided to intervene personally. The director made a special effort to visit Hackman and explained that Unforgiven was not a typical violent Western, but rather a film that would actually serve as a meditation on the consequences and futility of violence. Eastwood's persuasive argument about the film's deeper anti-violence message eventually convinced Hackman to reconsider, leading to his participation in what many consider his finest performance. Fact 4. Richard Harris thought it was a prank. One of the most amusing casting stories from Unforgiven involves the legendary Irish actor Richard Harris and a case of incredibly poor timing that nearly derailed his participation in the film. When Clint Eastwood decided he wanted Harris to play the flamboyant and dangerous gunslinger English Bob, he took the personal approach and called the actor directly to offer him the role, which was already a sign of respect given Eastwood's stature in Hollywood. However, the timing of Eastwood's phone call created a situation so coincidental that it seemed almost scripted for a comedy. At the exact moment when Eastwood's call came through, Harris happened to be sitting in his living room watching High Plains Drifter, the 1973 Western that Eastwood had both directed and starred in. So when Harris picked up the phone and heard someone claiming to be Clint Eastwood offering him a role in a new Western, the actor's first instinct was complete disbelief. Harris, who was known for his quick wit and skeptical nature, immediately assumed that one of his friends or colleagues was playing an elaborate practical joke on him. The coincidence seemed far too perfect to be real. What were the odds that the actual Clint Eastwood would call at the precise moment Harris was watching one of Eastwood's own films? From Harris's perspective, it had to be someone doing their best Eastwood impression while knowing exactly what he was watching on television. The confusion continued for several minutes as Harris remained convinced he was being pranked, probably responding to Eastwood's genuine offer with the kind of skeptical comments and questions you'd expect someone to use when they think they're dealing with a practical joker. Meanwhile, Eastwood found himself in the unusual position of having to prove his own identity to an actor he was trying to cast in his movie. Eventually, Harris realized that the call was indeed legitimate and that he was actually speaking with the real Clint Eastwood about a genuine film opportunity. Once the misunderstanding was cleared up, Harris accepted the role of English Bob, the pompous and theatrical gunslinger whose arrival in Big Whiskey sets many of the film's events in motion. The character became one of Harris's most memorable later career performances, showcasing his ability to blend menace with theatrical flair. Fact 5. Morgan Freeman recruited himself. Morgan Freeman's casting as Ned Logan in Unforgiven happened through one of Hollywood's most unusual networking stories, where the actor essentially had to campaign for a role that wasn't even offered to him in the first place. Unlike the typical casting process where agents submit their clients or directors reach out to specific actors they have in mind, Freeman's path to joining the film came through a completely unexpected conversation on an entirely different movie set. During the filming of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves in 1991, Freeman was working alongside Kevin Costner, who was playing the title character in that medieval adventure film. At some point during their time together on set, Costner mentioned that he had heard about an upcoming Clint Eastwood project called Unforgiven and suggested that there might be a perfect role in the script for Freeman. Costner, who had his own connections in Hollywood and was aware of various projects in development, thought Freeman would be ideal for the character of Ned Logan, the loyal friend and former partner of Eastwood's William Money. This casual conversation between two actors working on a completely different film sparked Freeman's interest enough that he decided to take matters into his own hands. Rather than waiting for his agent to pursue the role through traditional channels or hoping that Eastwood might eventually consider him during the casting process, Freeman made the bold decision to contact Eastwood directly and express his interest in being part of the project. Freeman's agent managed to get him a copy of the Unforgiven script, and after reading it, Freeman became even more convinced that he wanted to be involved with the film. He then took the unusual step of personally calling Clint Eastwood to let him know that he was interested in joining the cast and specifically wanted to play the role of Ned Logan, Money's old friend who reluctantly joins him for one last job. Eastwood, who had great respect for Freeman's talent and screen presence, was immediately receptive to the idea. In fact, Eastwood thought Freeman was perfect for the role and was pleased that the actor had reached out directly. This self-recruitment turned out to be one of the best decisions Freeman ever made, as his performance as Ned Logan became one of the most emotionally powerful elements of the entire film. Fact 6. The script never changed colors. Frances Fisher, who played the tough brothel worker Strawberry Alice in Unforgiven, made an observation during production that revealed something truly extraordinary about how Clint Eastwood approached the filmmaking process. Fisher told screenwriter David Webb Peoples that working on Unforgiven marked the first time in her entire acting career that she had seen a shooting script that remained completely white from beginning to end, which might sound like a trivial detail but actually represents something almost unheard of in Hollywood productions. To understand why this was so remarkable, you need to know how film scripts typically evolve during production. In the standard Hollywood system, scripts go through constant revisions throughout the development and filming process, with directors, producers, actors, and studio executives all contributing changes, suggestions, and rewrites. Each time a script is revised, the new pages are printed on different colored paper to help everyone keep track of which version they're working with and what changes have been made. The color coding system follows a specific pattern that most people in the film industry know by heart. White pages for the original script, then blue pages for the first revision, pink for the second revision, yellow for the third, green for the fourth, and so on through a rainbow of colors. By the time most films reach production, their scripts look like multicolored patchworks, with pages in blue, pink, yellow, green, and other colors all mixed together, representing the numerous changes that have been made along the way. What made Unforgiven so unusual was that Eastwood had such respect for David Webb Peoples' original screenplay that he saw no need to make the typical extensive revisions that plague most film productions. When Eastwood first considered making changes to the script, he quickly discovered that his attempts to improve it were actually making it worse, so he made the wise decision to stick with Peoples' original vision almost entirely. This meant that when Fisher and the other actors received their shooting scripts, they were looking at pages that were still the original white color, indicating that virtually no changes had been made from Peoples' initial draft. For experienced actors like Fisher, who had worked on numerous films where scripts were constantly being rewritten and revised, seeing an all-white shooting script was like encountering a rare artifact that demonstrated Eastwood's confidence in the material. Fact 7. A 21-hour marathon shoot broke studio rules. One Saturday evening during the filming of Unforgiven in Alberta, Canada, Clint Eastwood and his production team faced a crisis that would lead them to break virtually every labor regulation in the Warner Brothers rulebook. The crew had been shooting for about a month when local weather reports delivered devastating news. 12 inches of snow were predicted for Monday, followed by freezing rain for the remainder of the week, which would make filming the crucial outdoor scenes completely impossible. The timing couldn't have been worse because the crew was scheduled to have Sunday off, and they had planned to spend Monday and Tuesday shooting two critical scenes that required clear weather conditions. The first was an outdoor scene under a pine tree where the character Little Sue rides in on her horse to hand William Money his payment, and the second was the dramatic rainy sequence where Money leaves the saloon after his final confrontation with Little Bill and his men. Eastwood and assistant director Tom Rooker quickly realized they had only one option if they wanted to complete these essential scenes before the weather made filming impossible. They would have to work through their scheduled day off and shoot both scenes back-to-back in a marathon session that would violate every studio regulation about crew rest periods, meal breaks, and maximum working hours. The plan they devised was ambitious and physically demanding. They would start filming the pine tree scene on Sunday evening as the sun was setting, then continue working through the entire night and into Monday morning to shoot the saloon scene before the predicted snowfall arrived. This meant asking the entire crew to work 21 consecutive hours without any substantial breaks, and most problematically, without providing proper meals during this extended period. Making matters worse, the crew began demanding food as the hours wore on, specifically asking for pizza to sustain them through the grueling night shoot. However, as Rooker pointed out with considerable frustration, they were filming in a remote location in Alberta where no pizza delivery services were available to help feed a hungry film crew in the middle of the night. The water from the rain machines used for the saloon scene began freezing as temperatures dropped, and the horses struggled to maintain their footing on the increasingly slippery pavement, but Eastwood and his team pushed through to complete both scenes before the weather made filming impossible. Fact 8. The snow was real and unscripted. Sometimes the most memorable moments in cinema happen completely by accident, and Unforgiven provides a perfect example of how Mother Nature can become an unexpected collaborator in the filmmaking process. During one of the film's most emotionally powerful scenes, where William Money slowly recovers from the brutal beating he received at the hands of Sheriff Little Bill Daggett, snow begins to fall gently around the injured protagonist as he struggles to regain his strength and composure. This haunting image of snow falling on the battered and broken Money wasn't something that screenwriter David Webb Peoples had written into his script, nor was it an artistic choice that Clint Eastwood had planned during pre-production. The snowfall was completely natural and entirely unexpected, catching the film crew off guard as they were shooting this crucial character moment in the Alberta wilderness. When the snow started falling during filming, Eastwood faced a decision that many directors might have handled differently. The practical choice would have been to stop rolling cameras, wait for the weather to clear, and then reshoot the scene under the originally planned conditions. After all, continuity is usually a major concern in filmmaking, and introducing unexpected weather elements can create problems with matching shots and maintaining the visual flow of a scene. However, Eastwood recognized immediately that this unplanned snowfall was actually enhancing the emotional impact of the moment rather than detracting from it. The snow added a layer of visual poetry to Money's suffering and recovery that no amount of planning or special effects could have achieved, creating a sense of isolation and vulnerability that perfectly matched the character's physical and emotional state. The decision to keep the snow in the scene demonstrates Eastwood's instincts as both a director and an artist who understands that sometimes the best creative choices are the ones you never planned to make. The snowfall became one of the most visually striking and emotionally resonant moments in the entire film, serving as a natural metaphor for Money's spiritual cleansing and transformation as he prepares for his final confrontation with the forces that have wronged him and his friends. This spontaneous collaboration between nature and cinema resulted in a scene that feels both more authentic and more cinematically powerful than anything that could have been artificially created. Fact 9. Eastwood composed the theme song. Among Clint Eastwood's many talents as an actor, director, and producer, his musical abilities often surprise people who only know him for his work in front of and behind the camera. For Unforgiven, Eastwood took on the additional role of composer by creating the film's most important musical element, a haunting melody called Claudia's Theme that serves as the emotional backbone of the entire story and represents the invisible presence of William Money's deceased wife throughout the film. The theme takes its name from Claudia, Money's late wife who never appears in the movie but whose influence permeates every aspect of his character and motivations. According to the story, Claudia had been the civilizing force in Money's life, transforming him from a violent outlaw and killer into a peaceful farmer and devoted husband before her untimely death from smallpox left him struggling to raise their 2 children alone. Eastwood's composition perfectly captures the melancholy and longing that define Money's relationship with his past, both the violent life he left behind and the loving marriage that saved him from that darkness. The melody begins with a simple guitar line that feels both lonely and beautiful, reflecting Money's isolation as a widower trying to honor his wife's memory while being tempted back into the world of violence and killing that she had helped him escape. Throughout the film, snippets of Claudia's theme appear at crucial emotional moments, but it's most prominently featured as a framing device that opens and closes the movie. The theme serves as a musical reminder that, even though Claudia is gone, her influence continues to shape Money's choices and internal struggles as he grapples with the man he used to be versus the man she helped him become. Eastwood worked with longtime collaborator Lenny Niehaus, who handled the rest of the film's score, to ensure that Claudia's theme would integrate seamlessly with the overall musical landscape of the movie. This collaboration between director and composer was particularly meaningful because Niehaus had been working with Eastwood since the 1980s and understood how to translate Eastwood's musical ideas into the full orchestral arrangements that would support the emotional weight of the story. Fact 10. The original title was horrifically graphic. When David Webb Peoples first wrote what would eventually become Unforgiven back in 1976, he gave his screenplay a title that was so blunt and disturbing that it probably scared away potential producers and directors for years before anyone was willing to take on the project. The original title, The Cut Whore Killings, was shockingly graphic and left absolutely nothing to the imagination about the violent content that readers could expect to find within the script's pages. This title directly referenced the brutal attack on the prostitute Delilah that serves as the catalyst for the entire story, where a drunken cowboy slashes her face with a knife after she laughs at him during an intimate encounter. While the title was technically accurate in describing this central plot element, it was also crude and exploitative, in a way that made the screenplay sound like a cheap exploitation film, rather than the sophisticated meditation on violence and morality that Peoples had actually written. At some point during the script's long journey through Hollywood, Peoples changed the title to The William Money Killings, which was slightly less offensive but still emphasized the violent aspects of the story in a way that probably didn't help its chances of getting made. This second title focused on the protagonist's deadly past and suggested that the film would be primarily about Money's killing spree, which again misrepresented the deeper themes that Peoples was exploring in his screenplay. Both of these original titles likely contributed to the script's difficulty in finding a home in Hollywood, as they made the project sound like a straightforward violent western rather than the complex character study and genre deconstruction that it actually was. Studio executives and producers reading these titles would have expected a typical shoot-'em-up western focused on graphic violence rather than a thoughtful examination of the psychological and moral consequences of killing. When Clint Eastwood finally decided to make the film, one of his few changes to Peoples' original screenplay was simplifying the title to just Unforgiven. This single word captured the essence of the story much more effectively than either of the previous titles, suggesting themes of redemption, guilt, and moral ambiguity, without focusing solely on the violent elements that had made the earlier titles so off-putting to potential filmmakers. Fact 11. A story editor called it garbage. In 1984, 8 years before Unforgiven would win the Academy Award for Best Picture, the screenplay faced one of its harshest rejections from an unexpected source within Clint Eastwood's own production company. Sonia Cherniss, who served as Eastwood's longtime story editor at Malpaso Productions, read David Webb Peoples' script and delivered a devastating assessment that could have killed the project entirely if Eastwood had chosen to follow her advice. Cherniss, whose job was to evaluate potential film projects and provide honest feedback about their commercial and artistic viability, wrote a scathing internal memo that left no doubt about her feelings regarding the Unforgiven screenplay. Her assessment was so negative that she declared the script didn't deserve her time or Eastwood's consideration, suggesting that the material was beneath the standards that Malpaso Productions should maintain. The story editor went even further in her criticism, calling the screenplay an insult to this company, and strongly urging Eastwood to abandon the project immediately. Her memo specifically instructed him to get rid of it fast, using capital letters to emphasize the urgency she felt about distancing the company from what she considered to be inferior material that could potentially damage their reputation. Cherniss had been working with Eastwood for years and had developed a reputation for being able to identify scripts with commercial and artistic potential, so her strong negative reaction to Unforgiven carried significant weight within the organization. Her role as story editor meant that she was responsible for helping Eastwood choose projects that would be both financially successful and artistically rewarding, so her recommendation to reject the script represented a serious professional judgment about its prospects. What makes this rejection so remarkable in hindsight is that Cherniss was evaluating what would eventually become one of the most critically acclaimed and commercially successful films of Eastwood's entire career. The screenplay that she found so objectionable would go on to win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, and earn over $159 million at the worldwide box office. Fortunately for cinema history, Eastwood chose to trust his own instincts about the script's potential, rather than following his story editor's advice to abandon the project entirely. Fact 12. Gene Hackman's Rodney King scene. Gene Hackman made a provocative and deeply personal connection between his role in Unforgiven and one of the most shocking incidents of police brutality in American history, when he described a particularly disturbing scene in the film. According to Clint Eastwood biographer Richard Schickel, who was present on the set during filming, Hackman referred to the sequence where Sheriff Little Bill Daggett oversees the torture of Ned Logan as "my Rodney King scene," drawing a deliberate parallel to the brutal beating that had occurred just months before the film went into production. The reference was to the infamous March 3, 1991 incident in Los Angeles, where 4 police officers brutally beat motorist Rodney King following a high-speed chase, an event that was captured on videotape by a bystander and shocked the nation when it was broadcast on television news programs across the country. The beating became a symbol of police brutality and systemic racism in law enforcement, and the subsequent acquittal of the officers involved sparked the devastating Los Angeles riots in April of 1992. In Unforgiven, the scene that Hackman was referencing occurs when his character, Sheriff Daggett, allows his deputies to torture Ned Logan, played by Morgan Freeman, in an attempt to extract information about the whereabouts of William Money and the Schofield Kid. The torture ultimately results in Logan's death, and Daggett displays the body outside the saloon as a warning to other potential troublemakers who might come to Big Whiskey seeking the bounty on the 2 cowboys. Hackman's comparison between his fictional character's actions and the real-world police brutality incident reveals his understanding of the deeper themes that the film was exploring about the abuse of power by those positions of authority. By making this connection, Hackman was acknowledging that Sheriff Daggett represented the same kind of corrupt law enforcement mentality that had been exposed in the Rodney King beating. The timing of this reference was particularly significant, because the Rodney King incident was still fresh in everyone's minds during the filming of Unforgiven, and the trial of the officers involved was ongoing. Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates, who had been heavily criticized for his handling of the incident, resigned from his position about 6 weeks before Unforgiven was released in theaters. Fact 13. Canadian Union made a special deal. The story of how Clint Eastwood managed to bring his longtime crew to Canada for the filming of Unforgiven reveals the extraordinary lengths that film unions will go to accommodate directors who have earned their respect, admiration. Eastwood is famous throughout Hollywood for his loyalty to the technicians, designers, and other behind-the-scenes professionals who work on his films, with many crew members having collaborated with him for decades across multiple projects, creating what he often refers to as his filmmaking family. When Eastwood's cinematographer Jack Green was working on a different project in Canada, a representative from the Canadian Film Union approached him with a question about whether Eastwood would ever consider making a movie in their country. Green's response was immediate and definitive. He told the union official that Eastwood would never film in Canada because the director wouldn't be able to bring his regular crew members with him, referring to them as his family. This conversation highlighted a common problem in international film production, where strict union regulations typically require directors to hire local crew members for most positions when filming in foreign countries. These rules are designed to protect local workers and ensure that foreign productions provide employment opportunities for domestic film industry professionals, but they can also prevent directors from working with their preferred collaborators. However, the Canadian Union was so eager to attract Eastwood to film in their country that they offered to create a special exception to their normal work rules. The union proposed a unique compromise. They would waive their standard regulations for any member of Eastwood's crew who could prove they had worked on at least 5 previous Eastwood films, demonstrating their status as part of his core team. This unprecedented arrangement allowed Eastwood to bring his most trusted collaborators with him to Alberta, while still providing work opportunities for Canadian crew members in other positions. The deal reflected both the Canadian Union's recognition of Eastwood's reputation as a filmmaker and their understanding of how important his longtime crew relationships were to the quality and efficiency of his productions. The arrangement worked so well that Eastwood was able to maintain his famously fast and efficient shooting style while working in the challenging Alberta locations, completing Unforgiven in just 39 days despite the weather difficulties and remote filming locations. Fact 14. It was Eastwood's 16th film for his first Oscar. One of the most surprising aspects of Clint Eastwood's Academy Awards history is how long it took for the prestigious organization to recognize his talents. Despite his status as one of Hollywood's most successful and respected figures for decades before Unforgiven finally brought him Oscar glory, by the time Unforgiven was released in 1992, Eastwood had already directed 15 previous films and starred as the lead actor in 33 other movies, building an impressive resume that included iconic roles and critically acclaimed directorial efforts. Eastwood's directorial career had begun in 1971 with Play Misty for Me, a psychological thriller that he also starred in, and continued with notable films like High Plains Drifter, The Outlaw Josie Wales, and Pale Rider, all of which demonstrated his skill behind the camera and his understanding of cinematic storytelling. As an actor, he had become a cultural icon through his work in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns and the Dirty Harry series, creating characters that became permanently embedded in popular culture. Despite this extensive body of work and his enormous commercial success at the box office, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences had consistently overlooked Eastwood's contributions to cinema. This oversight was particularly notable given that many of his films had been both critically praised and financially successful, suggesting that his work had broad appeal beyond just commercial entertainment. Unforgiven changed everything for Eastwood's relationship with the Academy, earning him 3 nominations in 1993. Best Actor for his performance as William Munny, Best Director for his work behind the camera, and Best Picture as the film's producer. He won 2 of these awards, taking home the Oscars for Best Director and Best Picture, while losing the Best Actor award to Al Pacino for his performance in Scent of a Woman. At the time of his Best Director win, Eastwood was 62 years old and became the oldest person ever to receive that particular honor, a record that stood for several years. The recognition was particularly meaningful because it validated not just Unforgiven as a single achievement, but acknowledged his entire career's worth of contributions to filmmaking as both an actor and director who had helped shape American cinema for more than 3 decades. Fact 15. The film has a Japanese samurai remake. 21 years after Clint Eastwood's Western masterpiece premiered in American theaters, the story of Unforgiven found new life in an unexpected cultural setting when Japanese director Lee Sang-il created a complete remake that transported the entire narrative from the American frontier to feudal Japan. Released in 2013, this Japanese adaptation starred Ken Watanabe, the acclaimed actor known for his roles in films like The Last Samurai and Inception, in the lead role that had originally been played by Eastwood himself. The Japanese version, which kept the simple title Unforgiven, required significant changes to adapt the story to its new cultural and historical context. Instead of setting the action in the declining days of the American Old West, Lee Sang-il moved the timeline to the early Meiji era in Japan, a period of dramatic social and political transformation when the traditional samurai class was being dismantled, and Japan was rapidly modernizing under Western influence. This historical setting proved to be a brilliant choice because it allowed the remake to explore many of the same themes as the original film while making them relevant to Japanese culture and history. Just as Eastwood's version dealt with aging gunfighters struggling to find their place in a changing world, the Japanese adaptation focused on former samurai warriors who were being forced to abandon their traditional way of life as Japan embraced modernization and Western customs. Ken Watanabe's character was transformed from William Munny, the retired gunslinger and pig farmer, into a former samurai who had laid down his sword and was trying to live peacefully in the new Japan. The supporting characters and basic plot structure remained largely the same, but the weapons changed from guns to swords, and the western frontier town became a Japanese settlement. During this period of cultural upheaval, the remake demonstrated how universal the themes of Unforgiven really are, showing that stories about violence, redemption, aging, and moral ambiguity can resonate across different cultures and time periods. The Japanese version received positive reviews and proved that Eastwood's meditation on the nature of violence and heroism could be successfully translated into entirely different cultural contexts, while maintaining the emotional power and philosophical depth of the original American Western.